daughter too, when you had one of those talks at that. And
I remember.
Oh,
She wanted to come, but my husband, he injured himself, so she stayed with him to make sure he wouldn't do something stupid, like go back on a ladder or something. So.
Good afternoon.
And you can just sign that
out. Julia, would you turn off the music, please? I think it's still on, yeah. Good afternoon. It's a very orderly class today. They're usually rowdy. Cell phones, yeah? You know what to do. Turn them off, please. I will not have interruptions. Okay, so new historical review, only 2 copies left, $5 each. Michael Oslin, who'll be here on September 1, and his book is about the Declaration of Independence. These are only $10 a piece. That's less than Amazon. That's less than anybody. So they're brand new books. We have 20 more upstairs, so if you're interested, let me know. Also, by the way, related to the Declaration, did you know that yesterday, August 10th, back in 1776, the Declaration finally arrived in London. It took 5 weeks by ship, and we're used to instant information. But they just found out yesterday that we said we're breaking away. So we'll see how they react to that. This Thursday at noon, we will be reading the Declaration and the Constitution here in this room. Several VIPs and people who are not VIPs, regular people, we call them, like me. This Thursday at noon. This is actually the finale of the People's University America 250, reading the actual documents out loud, publicly, and reaffirming or disaffirming our loyalty. So, on September 1, as I mentioned, Michael will be here, and his book is called National Treasure, and he claims it's the first complete history of our founding document. So you can challenge him on that if you want to. He'll be here. He calls it also a thrilling adventure story. So I don't know if he's thinking of the Nicolas Cage movie or what, but there you go. Today, our good friend, Anne, this being Anne, is back, and she's a professor of law at the University of Cincinnati, Donald P. Claycamp College of Law, where she teaches courses in constitutional, labor, and employment law. She's also the Arthur B. Hodges Professor Emerita at WVU College of Law, where she taught for 18 years. Before becoming a professor, she worked as a senior attorney at the National Labor Relations Board in Washington, D.C., where she argued cases in federal court. She's a widely published scholar with more than 70 articles and numerous books. She brings a deep interest in how law affects real people and how overlooked voices, especially women and workers, shape our shared history. She has degrees from Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, Carey School of Law, and Oxford. Very impressive. Please welcome back Anne Lofaso.
So can everyone hear me? Is that working? No? Okay. How about that? Okay, I'll do this if I have to. So anyway, I'm so excited to be here. I lived in West Virginia longer than any other place I've ever lived, so I consider myself a West Virginian, although I was born in New York, and you can probably still hear a little northern accent. But every opportunity I can come to Wheeling or to Morgantown or any place in West Virginia, I do. So I thank you so much for this warm welcome. Now this doesn't look like it's working. Oh, maybe it is. Okay, so I just want to thank Sean and Lunch with Books, but also all the invisible workers that made today possible, because there are so many people that go into these things and they don't get named and I don't know who they are. So I just want to thank you. I'm guessing that Sean's mother is one of them. So anyway, I want to rethink the founding narrative, which of course, I mean, I'm a big fan of the founding fathers, but there were also women's contributions that Sean asked me to speak about, and they are important, and they're not just white women, there's also women of color, in particular African Americans and also Native Americans. So I wanted to kind of bring in some diversity and show women did actually a lot of the work of the founding, and let's kind of explore that and see why they're, they're largely missing from textbooks and public memory, but we do have some of their stories left, and they're really inspiring. So, the American Revolution is mostly known, as you know, as a military and political victory for the American colonies. But it was also a social movement requiring the labor, communication, and community enforcement. And this is where women were central. So women shaped the revolution through their political thought, their communication networks, economic labor, their organizing, espionage, and even military. We're going to talk about that, which is pretty interesting. And their stories expand our understanding of the founding. It doesn't take away from what the Founding Fathers does, it adds to it. So I'm going to look at political thinkers, then organizers and community leaders, then intelligence and covert works, the spies, military service, and women's whose stories expose the revolution's contradictions, because we do know there were still enslaved people at that time. So there was liberty for some people, but not for everyone. However, I want to say, I really believe when the Constitution says we're trying to make a more perfect union, that it just didn't originally include some people, but it is trying to embrace everyone, and we're just always trying to get better. So I really believe in the Constitution, and I try to, I tell my students that they're welcome to not feel it included them, but I really believe we're always striving toward a more perfect union. So let's look at the women who shaped revolutionary ideology. Of course, Abigail Adams has to be the first person we talk about, and that's one that you will definitely know. Now, even though her parents owned slaves, she did not. She was an early abolitionist who viewed slavery as a threat to the American democratic experiment. She took care of the Adams household, the farm, the finances, and she was definitely the political partner of John Adams. She's the one who wrote Remember the Ladies, which I have an excerpt to. And think about it, she was the wife to the first minister to the court of St. James. That's the ambassador to London, okay? She was the first second lady and the second first lady, and also she was the mother, the mother to John Quincy Adams. So she has a very unique role. The only one who comes close is Barbara Bush. She gives us a lot of insight into wartime governance, republicanism, and the strain that was put on the domestic front. So this is the quote. I'm going to read some of it. "I long to hear that you have declared an independency." This is to her husband in 1776. "And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands." Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. I think she's giving him a little jab, you know? And if particular care and attention is not, these mistakes or we see them as mistakes, they were probably the proper spelling and grammar of the time. So if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. I mean, think they were like taxation without representation, but the women couldn't vote, right? So they were like, wait a second, what about me, right? Which is understandable. Anyway, you'll see these will be on, you'll have these slides anyway, so I'm not going to read all of it because we have limited time. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Mercy Otis Warren. And she wrote, she was a critic of tyranny, and she articulated a Republican virtue. I've been reading the history of the rise, progress, and termination of the American Revolution. It's online for free. It's an incredible work. She was right in the middle of things because she was in the middle of knowing, Jefferson and Adams, and she knew all these, the founding fathers. And so she writes the first written history of the American Revolution. So it's the earliest one. It is incredible because she's just giving her honest opinions. Now, she's not a servant, so she's not going to give this working class view, but she is giving a view, and the view of not of a military person, which the men were focusing on, but of a woman. And she does have to say things like, well, you know, my mind is of a woman, but I still can see. So it's definitely, probably she is doing that so she can be accepted and that men might read it. But she probably was like holding her tongue when she did that, but she did do that. It's a great read. And it's also an audiobook, so if you don't want to actually read it, you can listen to it. Phyllis Wheatley, I think I spelled her name wrong. I think it's actually Phillis. She's incredible. Because she was born a slave, she was born in Africa, and then at age 8, she was enslaved, brought over from West Africa. The Wheatley family, though, liked her a lot. They were in Massachusetts, and they taught her to read and write. She was so brilliant that she could not only read and write in English by the time she was 12, but in Latin and ancient Greek, okay? And so she did these beautiful poems, and some of them were just regular poems, but some were actually about liberty and virtue and hypocrisy. So she challenged racial and gender hierarchies, but not in an unkind way. She was very religious. She became a Christian, and she has a sad story though. She dies around at age, let's see, I think it's about 30, is that right? Yeah, 31, in London, and she didn't have any money by that time. She was basically free to go to London, and so she did have some freedom, but she died early, and it's really a shame. Some people call her the poet laureate of the American Revolution. So here, I just want to give you a little bit of analysis. This is not my analysis. I took it from a professional because I am not an English literature person. My daughter is, I'm not. So I just wanted to give you what other people have said about this. So the basic poem's plot, this is an allegorical poem called America. And Britannia is the mother, and the son is Americus. And she writes, "Thy power, O liberty, makes strong the weak, and wondrous instinct Ethiopians speak." So the Ethiopians are supposed to be referring to the people who were enslaved, but also women not just women, but the colonists themselves being weak because they were subjected to the king's will. So she's kind of trying to say, wait a second, we're enslaved, you guys want your liberty from Britain, but we want our liberty. And meanwhile, remember, this is the son rebelling against his mother, Britannia, okay? So anyway, the poem labels the son a rebel, and it closes with a call for Britain to wake up and treat its unhappy son more kindly. Otherwise, she hints that the parent may lose its child forever. And this was in 1768. So she's just really brilliant, and it's just, I really urge you can find her poems online. I urge you to just look at some of the poetry, and I think it's really hard to read poetry, so I always try to find someone online who's analyzed it so I can appreciate it more, because that is not something I am good at. So you can find this stuff online if this is also something that you're not as good at, kind of reading poetry, which is very dense and allegorical. Okay. Mary Catherine Goddard was a printer of the Maryland Journal. Her family were printers, and she published the first printed declaration with signers' names. But I think it was the second Declaration of Independence, but this is the first one that had the signers' names, okay? At least, there might be some conflict among scholars, but I'm pretty sure I tried to work it out, so I'm pretty sure that is correct. But in any event, it's either the first or the second. I think it's the second, but the first with the signed names, okay? Now, interestingly, she was also a leader in other ways. She was the Postmaster General until 1789, the Postmaster of Baltimore, when in 1789, the Postmaster General of all the postmasters removed her from her post because the position required more traveling than a woman could undertake. Now, then he gave it to his friend. Okay, so some things don't change, right? Okay, but look what he used. He used something that people would, he probably just wanted to give it to his friend, but he's like, oh, I'll just say she's a woman, and we can't have women doing this. It's bad for them to travel. And, then it would be hard to go against that. So let's go to organizers and protests and community leaders where the women are mobilizing boycotts and things like that. So Esther de Bert Reed, she was born in London, but she was a Protestant refugee from Belgium. She married Joseph Reed, who happened to be an American studying law in England, and they moved to Philadelphia with her widowed mother after the father died. She was exposed to Washington Adams through her husband, and she founded the Ladies Association of Philadelphia. They raised substantial funds for the Continental Army by encouraging women to sell their luxury items. Now, this would probably be the women, the ladies of her social standing, but they did. They sold them, and then they used it to purchase linen and sew over 2,000 uniforms for the soldiers. She authored The Sentiments of an American Woman, which was political rhetoric and female patriotism. She died, unfortunately, before the end of the revolution, but she has a successor and they continued on her good work. And this is just a couple of things in this particular, in The Sentiments of a Woman. Again, you can get this online. She says, "Our ambition is kindled by the fame of those heroines of antiquity who have proved to the universe that if the weakness of our Constitution is, if opinion and manners did not forbid us to march to glory by the same path as the men, we should at least equal and sometimes surpass them in our love for the public good." So she's actually talking about, we're just as good as you guys, but there's social barriers. And by the way, I just want to say, there's also social barriers for some men, right? It's not, I really believe that. And I say, when I go around, I say, oh, you think white men are always privileged? Go to West Virginia, okay? Not all white men are privileged. And I really believe that there's just a lot of different ways we can all be oppressed. And obviously it was more obvious that women as a whole group were being oppressed back then. And when you have some men who are being privileged, obviously could vote, could do other things, right? So she says, "I glory in all that my sex has done great and commendable." She says, "Born for liberty, disdaining to bear the irons of a tyrannical government." So women are suited, inherently suited for resistance. Remember, but there's case law as late as the late 19th century, almost in the late 19th century, right? The late 1800s, that talks about how a woman cannot be a lawyer because it takes the oxygen from her brain. All right? Sorry, it takes some oxygen to her brain, away from her uterus, right? And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm a lawyer, but all right. So anyway, very interesting. I mean, judges are saying this, right? It's crazy, right? So anyway, and then they're saying that other things, again, you have these slides and you can read some of them. I think they're wonderful. Okay. Penelope Barker, oh, she's interesting. She was married and widowed several times, making her very wealthy. Because back then, women couldn't own property. But if they were widowed, they got all of their husband's property and then they were the rich one. And they could conduct business. So I don't know why she got married after the first time, right? You hear of the rich widow that everyone wants to go after. This was why. So she gets married like 3 or 4 times. She outlives all her husbands. Very suspicious, okay? But anyway, and she gets all of their property. She amasses all of this wealth. She also had 9 children. 4 of them, though, were her first husband's children from a different marriage. Interestingly, all of them died early, except for 1, okay? I'm reading this, I'm going, this is interesting. But anyway, I'm sure back then a lot of children died, but I did kind of dawn on me, this is kind of strange. But anyway, she organizes the Edenton Tea Party, which is the first recorded women's political demonstration in colonial America. And that's months after the Boston Tea Party. But it's not dumping the tea over, it was a boycott. It was a boycott. And boycotts work, because we see this in present day when and this, you could take your favorite big company, but when you get mad at them, you don't eat at McDonald's if you get mad at McDonald's for some reason, or Starbucks or something. Or you say, oh, people are mad at Starbucks, so I'm gonna go there intentionally, right? So we know we can use our power as a consumer to affect political change if enough people do that. And they understood that. Okay. By the way, they signed they signed their own names, so they were not cowardly at all. But look what a London newspaper did. They did this political cartoon of them signing, and they outed them. And look, they make them look like they're bad mothers. See the child here, and that they're look at that. Isn't that risque? You can see her cleavage, and so. You see how they're trying to portray them the way we see politicians do today. We have all these negative ads, and all of a sudden you hear all these things that half of them are untrue about them. Probably some of them are true, right? But they exaggerate the bad side of someone. Okay, so some things don't change. Okay, Sarah Bradley Fulton, she organized the logistics for the Boston Tea Party. So, yeah, no, you don't hear about her, but there is a statue I think she might have been from Medford, but anyway, it's in Massachusetts. There is a statue that has been put up for her, and she was also a messenger for George Washington. So she also a very important role. And when you think about it, women were the ones who organized the household. So they were really good at managing things, right? So it makes sense that women would be in these roles. Mum Bet, meaning Mom Bet, like Elizabeth Freeman, was an enslaved person who sued for her freedom under the Massachusetts Constitution, and she wins. Isn't this incredible? And that's how it ends slavery 2 years later in Massachusetts. I mean, that's cool, right? The law worked. I tell my students, because a lot of my students are they're really upset about the law, and they think, half of them are this way, half of them are that way, and they both say that the law favors the other side, right? And I say, no, eventually it comes out. Like, you have to have some faith. Yeah, and you know what? That's why you vote, right? So I really believe in that. You don't have to. That's my personal view about things. I'm an optimist. But, can you imagine? She actually did this. This is incredible. This is amazing. Now, it wasn't in a southern state. She definitely would not have been successful. You have to have it has to be the right time and the right place, but she did it, and think how brave she must have been. Okay, this is some of my favorite stuff, is the spying in domestic spaces and social invisibility becomes tools. So, there's that show right now called, it's with the woman who played, oh God, I can't remember it. Anyway, it's about an older woman who's a lawyer who, I can't remember the name of it, the show. Matlock. Yeah, it's Matlock, but not the old Matlock. So, and she's like, oh, I can do all of these things because I'm invisible. I gotta tell you, in my lifetime, I have many times felt invisible, and I've used it to my benefit also. For example, when I used to go to court, some guy would come in oh, who are you? Oh, little girl. And then I'd be, oh, I'm studying right now, like I'm scared. And then I'd be working on my oral argument, and then I'd kick his butt in court because he was so arrogant, right? And believe me, women can be just as arrogant as men, but this happened to me, in my experience, it happened to me men who were doing that. Because they were, I don't know, maybe they were from a different time. I was 30 and they were probably at that point, their 60s, and 30 years ago, that would be people who were in their 90s. So that would have been a pretty long generation ago of men, which probably did think, okay, little girl. They didn't have any women in their law school class. Anyway, this is what makes the spy so effective. And that's why it's really exciting. So we have Lydia Barrington Dara, and I think she's interesting. She comes from Ireland, but she comes from Dublin, which is obviously a Catholic city. It's the Republic of Ireland rather than Northern Ireland, which was Protestant. But she's a Quaker. And she marries William Dara. They emigrate to the colonies before the Revolution, 1750s. And she works as a nurse and a midwife, so she's competent, very competent person. And she lives across the street from British General Howe, British General Howe, okay? So and the British are occupying Philadelphia at this time. And she just listened and passed intelligence on to Continental forces because, oh, you know, her little mind is not listening to anything, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? Like that they would just ignore her, right? And so this was really, I think, very, very savvy of her to be able to do this. She actually saved Washington's army when she overheard British officers quartered in her home, because they took over her home at one point, the quartering of soldiers, you know, the Third Amendment to the Constitution, no quartering of soldiers. So they went in there because they wanted to plan this attack, this secret attack on Washington, okay? It's not very secret if the women in the household are listening, right? So I just love that. I think it's so awesome. And of course, Washington was smart enough to actually like, oh yeah, let's do this, right? So I love that story, that how we, you know, were really clever and outsmarted them. This is interesting. We don't know if this person is the Culper spy ring is very, very famous. And this particular agent never got a name. We don't know who she is, but we're almost certain she's a woman because they called her lady. And I mean, it could be that it was not, but most scholars believe she was a woman. We don't know. Again, it's hidden, but she provided critical intelligence for British operations. So again, we have, but that's also just really important, the Culper spy ring. And of course, so many women working as moving letters, supplies. I mean, and they would move about more freely because the soldiers didn't think that they thought they were harmless. So it was easier for the women to do this. Okay, so let's talk about military service. All right, so Deborah Sampson, that is what they think she looked like. This is like what websites draw her as, okay? Which is, you know, Hollywood, you know, women must be beautiful, right? I mean, if you look, she could be, you know, she kind of looks like pretty manly, right? Anyway, the average man at this time was 5'5", which is, you know, I mean, the average man today is like 5'9.5". Actually, West Virginian men are actually taller than average. I know this because I am 5'2", so I'm actually very interested when people tell me I'm short. I say, no, I'm in the 20th percentile, so I know these things, okay? Anyway, so I am not that short. Anyway, but 5'5" was the average American height at the time. She was at least 5'7" or taller. She was flat-chested. As she was, I mean, I didn't put in all the descriptions of her because they're kind of nasty, like, ooh, she was a plain woman. That was the nicest thing that they said about her, you know? But, so she wasn't very attractive, apparently. She was orphaned and went from home to home, and some of the parents didn't want to educate her, but the brothers did. So she kind of played with the brothers, and what I found in sources was that the brothers would share their homework with her. I'm guessing she did the homework for them. What do you think, right? So that's how she learned, and she was thinking, I'm getting a great deal because I'm learning. And the boys are thinking, I'm getting a great deal because she's doing my homework, right? So I think that was a great trade-off because she then ends up becoming a teacher, and she's able to actually sustain herself. And then she's a skilled craftsman. She makes stools, milking stools, and she's a carpenter and a weaver. So she's just this really incredibly, you know, she's just really good with her hands, right? Anyway, she tries to join the army as Timothy Thayer, and she's discovered, but they let her go because that's like illegal, right, at the time, to do that. And so then she, like a few months later, enlists as Robert Shirtliff in an elite force. And she thought this is really good because to get into this elite force, you had to be stronger than average and bigger than average. So, you know, she's 5'7", broad-shouldered. So she was stronger than the average man. So this is like a big woman, right? And she serves in combat, gets wounded, but she doesn't want to go to the doctor because she's wounded in the thigh and then he might see that she's a woman. So she's also wounded by a sword in the forehead. So they take her anyway. They fix up her sword wound, but then she runs away and she takes out the bullet ball herself. It never comes out completely, and she's in pain. And then she tries to, and it never fully heals. She is eventually found out because a doctor, she gets sick again, and a doctor, when she's sort of unconscious, starts to remove her clothing to fix her, and sees that she's been bandaged up top. Even a woman who's small-breasted would show something, right? And so he felt bad, so he sent her to his wife and daughters and asked them to do the healing, and he didn't tell on her. Anyway, she does actually, eventually comes out, and she petitions the army for back pay, and she wins plus all the interest over those years. And she does eventually get some recognition. By the way, she does marry and has 4 children. And so, she's a very interesting person. Just a really, really interesting person. One of my favorites. Okay, Margaret Coburn, she actually was the first woman to receive a military pension by taking over her husband's cannon at Fort Washington. So when he couldn't do it. So she's also interesting, women, we're like, okay, I'm gonna step in. Kind of like, these are the Mulans of, right? Did you ever see Mulan? I love Mulan. That's like, when they ask you who your Disney princess is, maybe maybe the men don't get asked this, but or you talk to your granddaughters or your daughters and you say, who are you? I always say, I'm Mulan. Because I just think she's really cool that she did things because she didn't want her father to get hurt, right? I think that's so noble, but she wasn't allowed. So these are like the Mulans of the American Revolution. Okay, this is Benjamin Franklin's daughter, and she was doing large-scale clothing production for the soldiers, and she basically mobilized this network of elite women. So you can imagine, with having Benjamin Franklin as your father, that you would know a lot of people. They didn't have a very close relationship until the end of his life because he didn't believe in putting energy into his daughters. He believed in putting the energy and education into his sons. So again, even though Benjamin Franklin is this great liberator, but was also somewhat limited in his thinking. But however, she in the end is taking care of him, and they live together, and so it's interesting. Here's another woman. She marries Rebecca Flower, who marries William Young. They have a lot of children. The husband's politically connected to Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration. And so she was the person who made all of these flags for the Continental Army. And again, really important to have these flags and standards, and also not just for the Continental Army, but the Pennsylvania State Forces. Okay, so let's look at, I think we might even start, I thought I had too much material, but we might even, I don't want to jinx myself, but I'm hoping we can end a little early. So women who exposed the revolution's contradictions. Liberty was unevenly distributed. Women's stories reveal the revolution's limits. So again, we're always striving, at least in my view, a more perfect union. And it's not perfect, we know that. Like even think about it, regardless of whether you want to talk about race or sex, let's just talk about West Virginia compared to other states, right? We're not equal. We don't get the money that New York has, right? So we know that this is not a perfect union, okay? But when you think about what they had to go through and what we go through, I always remind my students, because they get depressed, I said, it's better than it was. I believe that. I'm not saying that's good, okay? I'm not saying that's perfect, but I believe it is better than it was. And progress is not like this, it does this, right? And people have different views on what progress is. And we live in a pluralist society where people can have those different views. And we shouldn't get upset with that. We should, actually that's good, that's what a democracy is for. So anyway, Molly Brandt, she's really interesting. So she was a loyalist. She's a Mohawk leader, and she's married to a white man, to an Englishman, Sir William Johnson. And she is influential in, I can't pronounce that, but Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee, maybe. I'm originally from New York, that has a lot of Native American names. I come from a town called Syosset, which is a Native American name, so I should be able to pronounce these things, but I don't. Anyway, so she's really a diplomat in the Mohawk Nation, but she's also married to this British man, so she is instrumental in persuading the Confederacy to support Britain in the American Revolution, meaning the Mohawk Indians, okay? Now, she also does help in the peace strategy when things are not going well, and then she goes to Canada and lives there out the rest of her life. So, and now you might say, why did the Indians help the Brits? Well, they got a relationship with them during the French and Indian War, right? And this is just me thinking, I don't know if this is true. If there's any historians in here, this is something I've wanted to research, but I'm thinking they thought that maybe they would be more likely if the colonists were under British control, that they would be able to keep more land of their land. I don't know, that's my hypothesis, but yeah, do you know?
Well, the British actually gave the Indians ammunition and guns and muskets, especially in the western frontier, which is Ohio Valley.
Right.
The Indians were upset that the whites were invading their territory.
Sure.
And the British wanted the alliance with the Indians to harass the Americans and the colonists to create an additional fighting front during the Revolutionary War.
That makes complete sense. It's like open up multiple fronts, like when the Nazi was
all the ammunition and the guns that the Indians had were supplied often from Fort Pitt or
Yeah.
Detroit, who actually was a big British. Anyway.
No, excellent. Thank you for that. That's wonderful. Thank you. It's reminding me of the Nazis who were fighting too many fronts in World War II. It's exactly the strategy. Okay, so Una Judge. So she was an enslaved woman who was in Washington's household. She was Martha Washington's personal slave. And she was, as well as a slave can be treated, she was, by all means, seems to be treated well. Because she is Martha Washington's housemaid and her main housemaid, she gets to buy beautiful clothes and gets shoes twice or 3 times a year, unlike the other enslaved people. But anyway, she escapes when she's in Philadelphia, because they go to when Washington goes to Philadelphia to be president, because remember that's the first capital or the second capital. Was it Philadelphia or New York? I know New York was the first capital, but oh, it was after? Okay, so it's the second. Thank you. So Philadelphia. So it's in Philadelphia, and then she escapes, and then Washington goes after her because he wants to bring her back. So because they're mad, and then they feel betrayed. So anyway, she hides, and she almost gets caught, and then he sends one of his generals out to get her. But he's an abolitionist, and he's not happy about it. So he kind of tips her off at one point, and anyway, she escapes again a second time, and she's able to pursue a life of being free. So again, this exposes, Washington did one of the things that Washington did that was so great was he gave up power. He said, I'm only gonna have 2 terms. I'm not a king. That's really important. That's the first thing I've been teaching in my common law class for the last decade that I've been teaching that, or more. I've taught that because it's an important principle. And same thing with, John Adams. He doesn't contest the election. He loses the election. I mean, these are really important first principles that these men abided by. So, but he's also enslaving people. So I always say that, people are not, they're good and bad. Some of the bad is very bad, and some of the good is really good. Look in Washington, there's some really bad and some really good. It's a contradiction, but it's something we have to, if you really want to be honest with our history, we shouldn't be afraid of it. There's nothing, it's something to acknowledge and maybe even forgive ourselves sometimes when we do say, you know what, I shouldn't have done that, I was wrong, and accept it. So I love her story. So let's do a summary and then conclude, and then I'm gonna open up for questions, okay? So women as political thinkers and communicators, they didn't merely influence, they were not merely influenced, by revolutionary ideas. They actually produced them, circulated, and preserved them. Women as organizers, protesters, and community leaders, their organizing reveals the revolution as a community-driven movement, not merely an elite political theory, like it's often presented. Women in espionage and covert work, they depended on gendered assumptions that women leveraged strategically. Women in military service and wartime labor, the war couldn't have been fought without women's labor, sometimes as an actual soldier, not that often, but also in other material ways, where women were also making the uniforms and things like that, which we know that it's really important that our soldiers have uniforms and tanks and all. I mean, they weren't making tanks, there weren't tanks then. But you know what I mean. But today, when we see that and sometimes we hear that our military doesn't have enough supplies, that's bad, right? We don't want our soldiers not to have supplies. And then women, they expose the revolution's contradictions. There's a fuller narrative here, but I don't see this as meaning we should then say, oh, that means the whole revolution is out. Again, you're welcome to feel that way. I have some students who feel that way. But I feel like, okay, let's talk about that. And that maybe without this revolution, women, people of color, may not, poor men or propertyless men, maybe they couldn't have had liberty as soon as they had it. Not soon enough, because it's never soon enough. So that's just, again, you don't have to buy that. That's my thought. And so why do these stories matter? Women shape the revolution's ideas, networks, labor, and political culture. The founding was a collective, contested, and diverse group, not the work of just a few great men. And its contemporary relevance is that we're expanding the founding narrative. It broadens our civic identity and deepens our understanding of American democracy. So that's I'm 1 minute early. So I wanted to leave the rest of the time for questions, and I'll try to answer them. But if I can't, maybe the gentleman in the aqua shirt will be able to, or the teal shirt, because he's been doing so well so far. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your warm West Virginia welcome.
Everybody knows the drill. If you have a question or comment, raise your hand, and I will come to you with the mic. Anybody? Okay.
Just a comment. Where were you when I was in college?
I don't know.
Anybody else have a question or comment? Oh, right here.
I'm 88 years old, but if I could, I would take one of your classes, and then I'd take another one.
Well, I asked Sean to invite me back next year, so please come. My mother is 88, actually, as well, so.
I see her.
And by the way, I thought we were closer in age, so it's true, I did.
After hearing your lecture, it really upsets me that none of these, I knew none of these names.
Except for Abigail Adams.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right.
But it's just so wrong that,
Yeah.
that they were excluded from the narrative of our country. It just makes me mad.
But that's why we need historians and the humanities, you know?
You're absolutely.
And I'm just going to do a little plug for higher education because I am in it, you know? I mean, it is really important to know our history, and yeah, and science is really important too. I mean, all of the, and not, it's not for everyone, college, it's not, but for some of us it's good and it helps critical thinking, and so I'm just doing a little plug there, forgive me, but I felt I needed to do that.
Any other questions or comments?
I wanted to make the observation that the Native Americans assisted the British in the New York theater as well.
Really?
Yes.
So interesting. I want to read about that because I'm originally from New York, so.
Indians were also active in Upper New York,
Yeah.
as well as the Ohio Valley and whatever. So it really wasn't, it's a front of the battlefield of the American Revolution that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying that the Indian nations were in Upper New York, as the gentleman indicated. I just happen to be reading a narrative right now. It's about the Ohio Valley and the whites coming in the Indian territory. So it was very topical for me in the response I made earlier about how the British supplied the Indians with much ammunition and muskets and the like, specifically to fight the incurrence of people into Kentucky and the Ohio River Valley, which is where a lot of the Shawnees and a number of other tribes were. And they were faced with the dilemma of, do we stand and try to fight the whites from, we keep having treaties and the treaties keep getting broken, and there was lines of demarcations where settlement was going to be allowed and the Indians would be on the other side of that kept getting encroached. But this was also a time that, the British were at war with the U.S., and it was to their benefit to arm the Indians to fight the white incursion. And so that's a second line of battle in whatever that we're never taught about that occurred during the Revolutionary War.
And a strategy that is still used today when we see modern warfare, when we go into some place and we enlist people that are from that area. So, very interesting.
The reason why we use the mic is so that those listening online can hear, and also for posterity, because we do record these programs, so we want everybody to hear the questions. So sorry if I'm, all right. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Have you done any research into loyalist women, Tory wives who may have helped the British with spying?
Not too much, but as I was talking, I started thinking about that, and it made me curious. And I was thinking that I want to do some more because they must have also done. I mean, wasn't Benedict Arnold married to a British woman? So, right. So I think, obviously the British must have thought of the same strategy, right? So I think that we were able to win the revolution because it's really hard to win a guerrilla warfare on your own. We've learned that the hard way in Afghanistan, for example. So, and certainly the Soviet Union learned that the hard way in Afghanistan. So I want to, I definitely want to do some research on that. Have you done any?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, when I come back next year, maybe as an aside, I'll talk to you about it.
Any other? Okay, I'm coming.
Well, I was just going to say, Benedict Arnold did have a British wife, and her relationship with Andre, I can't remember, the British officer who was caught when he was trying to meet with Benedict Arnold, he was actually captured and hung as a spy by the Americans. But his wife had a very big impact on Benedict Arnold's connection with the British in that whole thing of, he was the commander of West Point at the time, you may recall, and he was very brave in battle and thought as a very, but he was injured and he took the job at West Point because he was otherwise disabled or not on active duty anymore. But he served the Americans bravely for a time and was one of Washington's favorite generals at that time. So anyway.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody? All right. Okay, thank you so much for coming.